Hello, everyone. Today we are going to step away from computer servers, automated robots, and the freezing cold of the underground. We are going to dress in black tie to enter a world where invisible physics rules over art, and where the sheer vanity of a corporate executive proved that sound is not just something you hear, it is a physical force capable of demolishing the most expensive architecture in the world. I am a chief architectural acoustics engineer. My job is to design exactly how sound travels, bounces, and behaves inside massive spaces. 2 years ago, I was hired for the most ambitious project of my entire career, the construction of the Crystal Palace, a $50 million symphonic concert hall. It was an absolute masterpiece of modern architecture. The interior walls were lined from floor to ceiling with flawless white Italian marble, and the roof was an immense, sweeping dome of tempered glass that allowed the audience to gaze at the stars while listening to the orchestra play. But acoustically speaking, a room made entirely of marble and glass is an absolute nightmare. Sound bounces off hard surfaces, creating endless, chaotic echoes and overlapping frequencies, generating what we call standing waves. To ensure the orchestra sounded warm and perfect, and to protect the glass from acoustic pressure, I designed and installed a network of hundreds of sound-absorbing panels made of melamine foam and heavy oak wood resonators, strategically bolted over the marble walls. These panels trapped the destructive frequencies, making the sound safe and beautiful. The problem arrived exactly 3 weeks before the grand opening, when the board of investors brought in Julian as the new artistic and creative director. Julian was an unbearable elitist obsessed with visual minimalism. He came from directing contemporary art galleries and had absolutely no idea how the physics of sound waves actually worked. To him, the concert hall was a blank canvas, and my acoustic panels were ruining his vision. Monday morning arrived. We were in the final acoustic testing phase. Julian walked into the empty auditorium, his designer leather shoes echoing sharply across the hardwood floor. He looked at the towering marble walls partially covered by my beautiful oak sound-absorbing panels, and his face twisted into a grimace of pure disgust. "Engineer," he called out, waving his hand dismissively. "I have been reviewing the aesthetics of this hall. Those wood and foam panels are utterly hideous. They are hiding the natural veins of the Italian marble that cost us an absolute fortune. This hall is called the Crystal Palace, not the cardboard box. Friday is the grand opening gala. The mayor, our billionaire donors, and the national press are coming. I want you to unscrew and remove every single one of those acoustic panels from the walls. I want the marble naked, pure, and visually striking." I stared at him from the main stage, feeling a dark abyss open up beneath my feet. "Julian, that is a guaranteed physical and structural disaster," I explained, walking down into the seating area with a deep, incredibly firm voice. "This is not a painting gallery. It is a giant resonant chamber. Sound is physical air pressure. If you remove the absorbing panels, the low-frequency sound waves from the pipe organ and the cellos will bounce against the bare marble without losing any energy. They will create an acoustic feedback loop. The air pressure will accumulate and shoot straight up to the ceiling. That $5 million glass dome has a very specific resonant frequency. If the orchestra hits that exact note and the room doesn't absorb the echo, the air will vibrate with such violence that the glass will literally shatter into pieces right over the audience's heads. It is architectural suicide." Julian let out a shrill, arrogant laugh that bounced horribly around the empty auditorium, perfectly demonstrating his total, reckless ignorance. "Oh, please. You engineers are textbook drama queens," he replied, crossing his arms with a look of absolute superiority. "Sound is just air, not rocks. Are you seriously telling me that a few violins are going to break a reinforced glass roof? That only happens in cheap cartoons. I've been designing the most exclusive spaces in the world for 20 years, and I'm not going to let your ugly corkboards ruin the press photos. This is a direct order from creative management. Either you remove those panels right now and wipe the marble clean, or I'll fire you today, call in a team of unskilled laborers to rip them off the walls, and completely ruin your reputation in the industry." Any acoustics expert knows that sympathetic vibration and wave physics do not negotiate with art critics. I knew perfectly well that the acoustics of the hall were about to become a weapon of mass destruction, but since my entire career was on the line, I resorted to the infallible tactic of the corporate world, the unalterable digital log. "I absolutely refuse to endanger the structural integrity of this building under my professional responsibility, Julian," I answered with freezing coldness, pulling out my corporate tablet. "But since you have the executive rank, you are going to assume the risk." I handed him the screen. "You will log in with your signature. You will draft an order demanding the total removal of the acoustic absorption panels for purely aesthetic reasons. You will put in writing that you formally reject my technical warning regarding standing waves, acoustic feedback risk, and the resonant collapse of the glass dome. And you will sign that you assume, personally and legally, all financial and criminal responsibility for the destruction of the dome and any harm caused to the orchestra." Julian rolled his eyes with pure disdain. "If this ridiculous digital piece of paper makes you feel better, I'll sign it." "You are incredibly paranoid," he declared. He signed the order and validated the command. "There's your insurance. Now, strip those walls and let the architecture shine." I complied with the order. I hired a crew, and we spent 3 days removing all the protection. The marble was left shining, beautiful, and sleek. The lethal acoustic trap was set. Friday night arrived. The grand opening gala. The auditorium was packed to the brim with 1,500 high society guests, dressed in sharp tuxedos and evening gowns. The mayor and Julian were sitting in the VIP box of honor. Julian was smiling proudly at the photographers, showing off his gleaming, minimalist marble hall. The closing piece for the night was Camille Saint-Saëns' Organ Symphony, a monstrous, incredibly powerful musical composition. From the sound control booth in the back, I placed heavy, industrial-grade protection earmuffs over my ears. I looked at the decibel meters on my screen. They were already hovering in the red zone just from the murmurs of the audience. The conductor raised his baton. The music began. During the first few minutes, the violins sounded incredibly screechy, their high notes bouncing chaotically against the bare marble. People in the audience were frowning because the music sounded as if they were standing inside a giant tiled bathroom. But the true physical terror began in the final movement, when the double basses, the timpani drums, and the gargantuan pipe organ built into the front wall all joined in. The organist slammed his feet down on the heavy bass pedals. An incredibly deep, earth-shattering note blasted out of the 40-foot pipes. Without the wooden panels to absorb the energy, the pure sound wave slammed against the rear marble wall, bounced back to the front, and multiplied. The entire room entered a standing wave. The air inside the auditorium suddenly felt thick and heavy. The physical pressure on everyone's eardrums became unbearable. People in the audience began to cover their ears, feeling dizzy, literally feeling their own internal organs vibrating from the immense bass. My decibel meters maxed out and flashed error. And then, the orchestra hit the grand climax of the piece. A massive, sustained chord of brass and pipe organ. It was the exact resonant frequency of the glass. The immense glass dome on the roof, valued at $5 million, began to emit an agonizing, high-pitched screech that could be heard over the roaring music. The steel frames vibrated into a blur. Julian looked up from his VIP box, the smile instantly vanishing from his face. Crack! The sound was like a cannon firing. The central panel of the dome shattered. Fortunately, it was industrial-grade tempered safety glass, designed to break into small cubes rather than lethal shards to avoid decapitating anyone. But that didn't prevent the disaster. Millions of small, heavy glass cubes rained down like a lethal hailstorm from 100 feet in the air, crashing straight down into the seating area. The panic was apocalyptic. People screamed, throwing their hands over their heads. The musicians fled the stage in terror as the heavy glass chunks smashed into antique cellos, timpani drums, and music stands. In a matter of 10 seconds, the entire dome disintegrated under the sheer pressure of the sound. The $50 million concert hall was left exposed to the open night sky, utterly ruined under a thick carpet of broken glass and the winter snow that began to drift down into the room. Julian was cowering underneath the armchair in his VIP box, completely covered in white glass dust, hyperventilating and shaking like a terrified child. He had just realized that his aesthetic whim had destroyed the building, ruined million-dollar antique instruments, and caused the biggest cultural disaster in the country's history, broadcast live on national television. The next morning, the auditorium was ground zero. The president of the donor board, the insurance adjusters, and the mayor walked in, their shoes crunching loudly over millions of pieces of broken glass. The freezing winter air flooded the destroyed hall. We gathered in the main lobby. The silence was absolute and deadly. Julian, his expensive suit filthy and his eyes bloodshot, attempted the most despicable tactic to avoid going to prison. "Gentlemen, the structural integrity of the building was defective." Julian screamed hysterically, pointing a trembling finger at me in front of the president. "The engineer miscalculated the roof pressure. The glass was cheap and it shattered because of him. I was only in charge of the art." The president looked at me, with a glacial fury, waiting for my defense. I didn't even blink. I opened my corporate tablet, connected it to the large monitor in the lobby, and projected the document. There was the proof of his execution. Massive letters projected in front of all the furious investors. I order the total removal of the acoustic absorption panels for purely aesthetic reasons. I formally reject the chief engineer's technical warning regarding standing waves, acoustic feedback, and the resonant collapse of the glass dome. I assume, personally and legally, all financial and criminal responsibility for the destruction of the dome and any resulting damages. And right below it, the unalterable digital signature of Julian, artistic director. The board members read the text. Julian ran out of breath, looking as if he had just been punched in the stomach by a heavyweight fighter. "Julian," whispered the president with a voice so heavily laden with hatred that it froze the lobby. "You ignored the absolute laws of physics out of the pure arrogance of believing that acoustics is just a decorative whim. You have cost us $5 million in architecture and millions more in lawsuits from the orchestra. You are fired immediately. He turned toward the legal team. Open a civil and criminal lawsuit for criminal negligence and destruction of property. I want you to garnish his bank accounts, seize his art galleries, and take his home to pay for every single piece of glass he has broken. Security escorted Julian off the premises, crying and financially ruined for the rest of his life. It took us 8 full months to rebuild the glass dome. And this time, I personally designed and bolted twice as many acoustic panels over the Italian marble. I was promoted to general director of the palace. And nowadays, I can assure you that, no matter how ugly someone might think a sound-absorbing panel looks on the wall, absolutely no one dares to suggest that we remove it. If you liked it, hit the like button and subscribe for more.